All right, now that we got some good topology to work with, let's go ahead and look at how we can create some layers and start building variations on top of our design that we have here. So I'm going to start working with just the body on here, and if I scroll down, to this area down here for layers and open this up, I can go ahead and create a new layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and tap this little button here. That'll make a new layer for me. And after it's created, I should be able to give it a name. So I can name this variant, I'll do 01 like this, and hit enter. And you can see it's put into this recording mode. Now I created this layer at the highest subdivision level, and with this current version of ZBrush that I'm using for R6, that is actually something that's pretty important. You can't create a layer unless it's on the highest subdivision level. So just something to keep in mind. And so I've got this version that kind of looks like maybe it's mechanical kind of things within here. I'm going to soften this up a bit and make a version that's a little bit more organic feeling and pushing away from this organic slash cybernetic kind of feel to it. So I'm going to put it on my smooth brush, and we looked at an earlier part in the last video where we can hit the comma key, and we can open this up and we can go to our brushes tab, and then there's a smooth, and then there's a smooth stronger. If we use that, we can go ahead and use a stronger kind of smooth on these high-res models that we've got here. So I'm going to tap S, make my brush size a lot larger. So I'm going to go ahead and smooth that right in through there. And I can hit solo if I want to just see just what it is that I'm working with on here. So I'm going to smooth this out. So I'm just kind of smoothing this thing up. And I still like some of the shapes that we've got going on here. It just feels a bit more mechanical. So one of the advantages of using the subdivision levels is I can hit Shift D and drop down in my subdivision levels. And then now whenever I smooth, this thing smooths out really quickly like this. So I can really get rid of some of these details. I'm going to turn off the floor as well so I can see this a little bit better. So again, I want to keep some of these shapes here, but I just want to get rid of this kind of paneling kind of effect that's in there already and make sure that that's not so strong. And then this starts to feel a bit more organic at that point. And I think the back does still feel fairly organic, so I'm going to leave that. There are a few things on here that I did for a hard edge on this part right and through here that kind of makes it feel more like paneling, so I'll get rid of that, and I can hit D to step up in my subdivision levels, and then I can check my geometry and see that I'm at the high subdivision level. So another thing that we can do, you can see that sometimes the smoothing feels a little bit odd in some of the geometry here. I'll turn on polyframe and you can see how that kind of comes to this point right here. You can change the smoothing algorithm by starting to smooth, holding down Shift, and then letting go. And then it kind of changes the way that it smooths a little bit, and sometimes it can help with those areas. Another brush that might help with this is you could use any of your polish brushes or use Trim Dynamic. So if I do B and then T and then go to Trim Dynamic, you can see I could kind of flatten that area out a little bit and then smooth it, and it kind of gets rid of those little dimples that were there. So just some little things to kind of get rid of those effects that are there on the topology like this. I just want to barely tap that like this, kind of flatten that out just a little bit through here, just like that. And then now that I have this, I'm going to go ahead and use the Damien Standard brush. So I've got my own custom setup that I've made for myself, but I'm going to go ahead and show you where that sits. So we'll tap B and then D and then go to Damien Standard like this. And then now I can start to do some kind of cuts like this that you can see here and make some things like this. So I'm going to check it from about this value out and make sure everything reads from there. So we've got some detail that needs to be put in from about that level. And then once we know that this kind of works, you can get in a bit closer, drop your brush size down, and then start sculpting on this like this. So I always usually sculpt and then kind of use shift to turn on the smooth brush temporarily and kind of knock back whatever that is that I've sculpted and make sure that it's not too strong for things. So I'm going to try to make this feel a little bit more organic just by adding some of these creases right in through here along the ridge. And I think what I'm going to do is just go ahead and put this into a time-lapse mode and continue on with this. So the brushes that I'll be using probably is this clay tube, so I'll tap B and then C, and then you can find clay tubes right here. So that, maybe standard brush and Damien standard, with those few, maybe possibly even trim dynamic to get those shapes. So the clay tubes really feels really nice for laying down some forms like this, and it feels like strips of clay, or when you're working with this organic stuff, it almost feels like muscle structure and muscle fiber. So we can do something like that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put this into the time-lapse mode and then just kind of finish this out, and we'll come back after I have something that's pretty different between the two different versions. All right, now that our layer is generated, let's go ahead and take a look at how we can use this layer to our advantage and start playing around some of the design ideas for this. So if we open up our layers under the tool settings here, you can see that when we get done, it'll still be in this recording mode, and we're going to go ahead and click that once to release that and take it out of recording mode. It then changes things to where you see this little eye icon, and you can click that eye icon and turn on and off the layer. So currently I'm just working with the arms here. I'm going to go ahead and put it onto this piece here. I have an option enabled where I can hold down Alt and just click on this thing here, which is going to switch my subtools for me to the body that you can see here, or you can just come under subtool and select it there. Either way. And I'm going to go to layers here, and I'm going to turn off the recording mode for this as well. And then you can see we've got the eye icon that we can turn on and off for that. Now if we have that layer visible, we can also take this slider and we can drag it down so we can get in-betweens between the original sculpt, and then we can start to slide up into the new sculpt that we have that's on that layer. So you can actually blend different sculpts together this way using layers. Now you see if I push it really far to the left, I start pushing negative values, and you can actually push a negative value that way. The other thing to take note is that if I push it all the way up to the right, it's going to give it a value of 1, and that's going to be 100% the sculpt that I made. We can also just click on here lightly and it'll highlight that, and you can put a number in there, and I can overdrive this. I'll put like a value of 4, and then it will actually allow me to let's see here, maybe if I do 2, we'll try 2. No, it doesn't seem to allow me to do that. Before, you're able to overdrive these values, so you could actually push this thing even beyond the value that you had here. So I'm not really sure why that's not allowing that. I don't know if I have to push this slider down here, but that seems to work. But you can see that's a value of 5. So it really pushes this thing pretty crazy. So I think you want to stay really close, probably to still to 1, but if you need to kind of push this thing even a little bit more, you do have the option to kind of do that. So I'm going to set this back down to 1 and keep this here like this. So we've got this as an option for this layer. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how we can kind of create a blank canvas, so to speak, to where we could have this model just completely smoothed out, and then we could have the sculpt put on a layer all by itself as well. Alright, for this setup, what I need to do is go ahead and take a look at the subdivision level that I have. So if I go to geometry and open that up, we can see there's 5 subdivision levels. So let's just keep that in mind, that we've got 5 subdivision levels for this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that layer tab that we saw here, and I'm just going to turn this layer off so there's nothing there, kind of changing things for shape. And then I'm going to drop down to the low subdivision level. So I'm going to hit Shift D. Actually, before I drop down, I'm going to store a morph target for this. So let's come down here and let's store a morph target. We're going to go to morph target and we'll say store morph target. And what it's going to do is hold in memory this exact shape that we have for this model currently right now. Okay, so we're just going to hold that shape. Now we're going to go to our geometry, and we'll drop this down to the low subdivision level like that. And now we'll say delete higher. So we're going to delete all the higher subdivision levels. And then now we can go ahead and divide this thing, and we'll divide it to where we've got 5 subdivision levels again. So we'll divide all the way up to 5. And when we do that, you can see this is the model after it's just been smoothed, and it becomes kind of like our blank canvas that we have. The thing is, we now have this morph target, and it held that before we did this change to it. So now we can do this switch button, and we can switch between the smooth version and this detailed version. Okay, so right now if we go to layers, our layers should still be there. If we put on our variation on this, you can see it doesn't really work too well. We've got this variation thing going on, and this what was on that layer is just that little bit of sculpting information. So we needed this sculpting information together with this right here. Okay, so I'm going to turn off that layer right here like this, and I'm going to make a new layer like that, and it's going to put it into recording mode. And then I'm going to just go to the morph target, and we'll say switch, and that'll turn on that for that sculpt. So I can delete the morph target now, and we don't need that anymore. And actually what we've done is transferred that information onto the sculpting layer. So we'll just give this a name, and we'll call this base sculpt like that. And then we'll take it out of recording mode, and you can see if we turn it off if we get that smooth version, if we turn it on, we've got this, and if we turn on the other one we had before, we get our sculpt back. So we've basically kind of separated out that base sculpt into a layer. I'm not sure if I clicked one of these on accident, and maybe I just need to delete that thing. I think I actually accidentally hit the create new layer button twice for that. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and delete that. And you can see this can be a little bit memory intensive at times, so it might take a little bit to switch these. So I'm going to go ahead and just say delete layer right here, like that. So now we've got these two different layers, and now we're kind of back to where we were at before for this. What could be interesting is I could say I want this just to be a different version, right? So again, if we hold the morph target for this, so let's go ahead and go down to our morph target and say store morph target. We're storing this entire thing as a sculpt, right? Because before we had to do a combination of those two different layers to get this to work. Now we're going to go ahead and turn off the visibility on this stuff. So we just got our blank canvas. And then now I'm going to add a new layer. Just click that once, like that. We're in recording mode. And we can give it a name, and we'll call this sculpt 01. And if I could type, there we go, 01. And then I'm going to go down here to the morph target area, and I'm going to say switch like this, and it's going to switch it into this version here. Now I can delete the morph target, don't need it anymore. And then we can take this thing out of recording mode like that. And so we'll get that eye icon back on. If we turn it off, we got our base sculpt that doesn't have anything on it. And now that variant 1 that we had, that we were turning on, that's just this thing, we don't actually need that anymore. So we can just select that layer, and we'll go ahead and delete it. And then now we've got our base sculpt that we can turn on. And then we also have this sculpt now that we can turn on. Now the thing is, you remember before we were combining those two together. We don't need to do that anymore. So we could even take this, you remember the value of this thing, we could kind of drop it back a little bit. So if you want just a little bit of this one in there, you could do that. And if you wanted to knock this one back, you can start to get some interesting results by blending these two things together. And you could take this thing like all the way up. Again, we could overdrive values as well. So you can see with these two set to 100% for both of these, it starts to produce an even more kind of contrasted look between the two of these. So that's just something to keep in mind. So I've basically got that sculpt, and now I've separated this thing out, and now we have a blank canvas that we can start working with for our different sculpts. So I'm going to continue this, and I'm going to do that same process for the arms. And then from there, I'm going to sculpt an entirely new variant for this thing. I'm going to make a new layer on here, just like this. And so I'll just make a brand new layer. I'll put in recording mode, and I'll call this sculpt 02. Like this. And my thought is for this one that I'm going to make this one feel more segmented as far as like paneling and things, but I'm not going to do it. The first sculpt was kind of a little bit more mechanical. This time I'm going to try to do organic kind of paneling, something along those lines. So I'm going to put this back into a time-lapse mode and just start sculpting. Again, I'm going to use the same technique on the arms because we've got separate shapes for the arms than we do the body. And then I'll make an entirely new variant for this thing. Alright, so this variation is complete, and it looks a little weird right now. I've got these kind of holes in the stomach and maybe this mouth kind of thing. Actually later I'm going to be showing how to add extra bits that we can use as insert meshes, so I'm going to be building some kind of leg kind of system that's going to go in through here. So you might be kind of wondering what's going on with that, but that's what's going to happen at that point. So now we should have the body, and if we go to our layers, we can take this out of recording mode like this, and we can turn this off and on just like all the other layers that we have. I wanted to bulk this one up quite a bit. Now you can see if we start adding these things together, it's possible that we could get some interesting results. Could look really odd as well. But if you're going to be blending three different things together, and so I'll put 0.33 for this one, put 0.33 for this one, and 0.33 for this one as well, and see what the results of that looks like. So that could be somewhat of an interesting start to all three of these put together. Again, if we wanted to hold that thing, we could go down to the morph target area, and I'll delete the morph target and I'll store a morph target, and then at that point I could turn everything else off. I'm going to put this up to 1, this one to 1, and this one to 1 as well, and then turn everything off, and then make a new sculpt layer and just call this sculpt 3 like this. And with the recording mode enabled, I can go to that morph target and say switch, and I can delete the morph target after that has filled that thing in. And once it's filled that layer, I can just go ahead and hit delete morph target on there, and then now I can go to my layers and I could turn this thing on and off. But this could be a start of something. It looks kind of a cool version, but I'm not sure what I'm going to sculpt on this this iteration that we have here, but I'll put this in a time-lapse mode and just see what we end up with. My goal is to end up with 4 very distinct variations, and then on top of that I'm going to do 3 different versions of those inside of Photoshop using a combination of painting and some other things. So I want to get these 4 different targets done. So I'm going to put this in time-lapse mode again, and then continue on and sculpt on this. Alright, after all my sculpting is done, I basically have these four different variations to work with within here. The first two that you see here, this one here was the original one, and it was pushed to this, which was a little bit more organic. This one has a bit more of like kind of a lobster kind of feel to it, and I thought this one had a little bit more, like I was thinking kind of like turtle shell kind of thing for this one. So I've got these four different variants on this. The next step is going to be me creating some custom brushes, insert mesh brushes, to where I can start adding some really cool details on this. So the plan is to take each one of these and build maybe 3 different variations of each one of these. So by the time I'm done with this, I'll have 12 different designs that can be chosen from, but they all should have a little bit of a different look and a different feel. So each one of these like classes for this, this, and this, and this, with these accessories, they'll feel a little bit different, but I don't think it will be too crazy for that. So again, that next step is going to be building insert mesh brushes and then building some variations on this. This will wrap this up for the part on how to use layers and use layers to your advantage to build variations, and then working with morph targets within that system to give you some variations within your designs.